All right, and welcome to Better Understanding the Bible. I'm your host, Alice, and let's get to it. In this episode, the Adamic Covenant and the Mosaic Covenant, and I'm going to compare and show how the Adamic Covenant was based upon the exact same manner in which the Mosaic Covenant was established, the same stipulations, blessings, and cursings, for there was one covenant between God and Adam that was continued in Moses, summarized in Jesus. We are familiar with Isaiah 45:7, as I've already gone through in my past videos exploring the language. I form the light, I make peace, which is language derived in the creation of the covenant, being those who are in light are in peace, meaning they are in covenant life with God. And creating darkness and evil is a reference to being outside of that covenant, being referred to as death. So the covenant of life, being in the covenant being outside of it, being death. We see that same language being applied by Jesus when he says, "He that follows me shall not walk in darkness." So, in other words, he that follows me will not be outside of the covenant of God, but shall have the light of life. So we see the exact same language. I am the light of the world. I form the light. I make peace, the covenant of life. And we see the same language of being darkness. So we have in covenant being life and light, out of covenant being darkness and death. Genesis 2:7, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. The promised land. Now, according to the Mosaic Covenant, when we read the words of the law, we understand that God is bringing them into the land. So, in the words of the law, that you may go unto the land which the Lord will give thee, a land flowing with milk and honey, as the Lord God of thy fathers has promised. So, we have the establishment of the covenant, and we have land being given to Moses and the children of Israel. And the same thing takes place in Genesis 2:8 when we read, and the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the living man whom he had formed. So the covenantal man was put in the garden or in the land which God prepared for him, just as Moses and Israel was put into the promised land when they received their covenant entrance. And out of the ground made the Lord God to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So out of the ground God made every tree to grow, and it was good for food. And we read in Leviticus, according to the blessings, that the land, then I will give you rain in due season, and the land shall yield her increase, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit. So, in the same language, in the same promise, we see the same establishment of the covenant between Adam as we do with Moses. And the Lord God took the man and put him in the garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it. So now that Adam was made, so the land was made, God created peace and established the living man and put him into the garden, into the promised land, to keep the things of that agreement. Which brings us then again to the blessings and the cursings, because just as Moses agreed to have Israel go into the land, they had blessings and curses and stipulations. As it says, if you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and do them, then they would receive the blessings. But if they didn't, they'd receive the curse. Well, we see the exact same thing in Genesis 2:16 being established as the Lord commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat. Now, what's interesting about that is that includes the tree of life. So that's the being in covenant. But we also see in Genesis 2:17, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that you shall not eat, for in the day you eat of it, you shall surely die. So as long as you're in covenant, you can eat of every tree, and everything is good. You're in life. You're in the covenant, the tree of life. And in Genesis 20:17, we see the death, the removal from the covenant, if they eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Just as was given in Deuteronomy, I call heaven and earth to record this day against you, that I have set before you the life and death, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge and good and evil. blessing and the curse. Therefore choose life, that both you and your seed will live. And all the people answered unto Moses, saying, All that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And likewise Adam and Eve, they were both naked, the man and his wife, and they were not ashamed. Then came the fall. And just as we see in Leviticus, the warning of the stipulations, that if you shall despise my statutes, or if your soul abhors my judgments, so that you will not do all my commandments, but you break my covenant, then the curse shall come upon them. And we read in Genesis 3:6, and when the woman saw a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof and did eat, and gave also unto her husband, and he did eat. And Paul in Romans talks about this in a different light, so we can see this clearer, saying, And when they knew God, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. So we get a deeper view from Paul, who is under the old covenant of Moses, talking about the things that Adam and Eve went through, saying that when they knew they knew God, because of their imaginations, their foolish heart was darkened. And here we have, and Eve, desiring to be wise, she took and ate and broke the covenant. And professing to be wise, they became fools. Genesis 3:7, And the eyes of them were both opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons, and they clothed themselves. However, just as in the covenant agreement of Moses, God said, I will walk among you, and I will be your God, and you shall be my people. God likewise in Genesis had the same promise. For in Genesis 3:8 they heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. So God was walking just as the Mosaic Covenant. He was walking among them, being their God. But Adam and Eve hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. This is interesting because in the New Testament Greek, the word coming is mainly represented by two words. The one we're looking at is the parousia. The parousia means the present, to be present, presence, a being present. And in John 1:2-28, we see, And now, little children, abide in him, that when he shall appear, we may have confidence and not be ashamed before him at his coming. Well, that's a direct reference to Adam and Eve, who became ashamed and clothed themselves, even though they were both once naked and unashamed. We now here have Jesus, or John, talking about Jesus before him at his presence, at his coming, at his parousia, to not be ashamed. So we have the exact same sentiment at the changing of the new covenant. And he said, and Adam said to God, after God called out for him, I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, and I hid myself. Therefore, now, little children, when he shall appear, we may have confidence and not be ashamed before him at his presence. And the Lord God of the was walking in the garden, and Adam and Eve hid themselves from the presence of the Lord. So we can see the exact same situation put upon the children of Israel that was incurred by Adam and Eve. However, Jesus gave them opportunity to not be ashamed at the presence of the Lord. And John, Jesus confirms, and this is the condemnation, that light has come into the world. But men loved darkness rather than the light, because their deeds were evil. I heard the voice of God, and I was afraid, because I was naked, and I hid myself. And why? Because he partook of the knowledge of the tree of the garden of evil, removing him from the light, putting him into darkness, removing him from the covenant of God, and putting him outside of the covenant of God. Jeremiah 11:3, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, Cursed be the man that obeyeth not the words of this covenant. So what ended up happening to Adam? Well, because you have hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and have eaten of the tree which I commanded you, saying, You shall not eat of it, cursed is the land for thy sake. In sorrow shall you eat of it all the days of your life. Cursed be the man that obeyeth not the words of this covenant. So we see the old covenant of Moses is the same covenant established with Adam. Thorns and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. Leviticus, and your strength shall be spent in vain, for your land shall not yield her increase, neither shall the trees of the land yield their fruits. Same result of the curse. They lost the fruitfulness, just as in Leviticus, the curse, they lose their fruitfulness. Which brings about the requirement for the blood of the covenant. For unto Adam also and unto his wife did the Lord God make coats of skins and clothe them. So here we have now the situation where God is dealing with their problem. And we can see that in Hebrews 9:19-22. For when every commandment had been spoken by Moses to all the people according to the law, he took the blood of the calves and the goats, and with water and scarlet wool and hyssop, and sprinkled both the book itself and all the people, saying, This is the blood of the covenant which God commanded you. And in the same way he sprinkled both the tabernacle and the vessels of the ministry with the blood. And according to the law, one may say, all things are cleansed with blood, and without the shedding of blood there is no forgiveness. And here we have Adam and Eve, who needed forgiveness for the breaking of the covenant, and we get an Adam and his Eve were made coats of skins, and he clothed them. The coats of skins tells us that there was a animal sacrifice to get the coats, and we have that atonement being promised in God's clothing. As we continue, Jesus says, This is the cup which is poured out for you, which is the new covenant in my blood. So the blood is necessary for the establishment of the old covenant. It's necessary for the establishment of the new covenant, and it was necessary at the establishment of Adam's covenant. For all of you who are baptized into Christ have clothed yourself with Christ, the fulfillment of the promise given to Adam. And according to the law of Moses, the fulfillment promise continued. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make an atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that maketh an atonement for the soul. This cup which is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. For you have clothed yourself with Christ. Therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from whence he was taken. And just as Deuteronomy expresses, And it shall come to pass, that as the Lord rejoiced over you to do good, that you shall be plucked from off the land, because you broke the covenant. And we see that how God gave the blessing, but now in the cursing he says, Just as I rejoiced over you to do good, and to multiply you, so the Lord will rejoice over you to destroy you and bring you to naught. And you shall be plucked off the land whither thou go to possess it. So the promised land was given to them in obedience, and it was removed from them in disobedience. The exact same issue with Adam. But what about the promise? For God promised to clothe them. Well then, what if some did not believe? Shall their unbelief make faith of God without effect? So should, because Adam and Eve, because they were not believing God and they partook in the knowledge of good and evil and they broke the covenant, should that then nullify the promise of God and the creation of the living man? Just as it says in Leviticus, well, and yet for all of that, when they be in the land of their enemies, I will not cast them away, neither will I abhor them, to destroy them utterly, and to break my covenant with them, for I am the Lord their God. I will greatly rejoice in the Lord, for my soul shall be joyful in my God, for he has clothed me with the garments of salvation. He has covered me with the robe of righteousness. So even though Adam and Eve broke the covenant, God was not willing to break the covenant, and he made for them a provision of the blood of animals to bring about atonement, with the promise of clothing them with the garments of salvation, with the robes of righteousness. For God commendeth or shows us his love towards us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. For as one man's disobedience the many were made sinners, so by the obedience of one shall the many be made righteous. For God commanded that the light shall shine out of darkness. So Adam and Eve broke the covenant between God and Adam, but God did not break his covenant with Adam, but instead instilled the new promise of atonement and restoration for the breaking, for the lack of their belief, for the lack of their faith and obedience. God made provision through the blood. And in Moses, he reestablished that exact covenant in wait for the sacrifice, the clothing of God to come. And it did in the form of Jesus, who shined a light out of their darkness. He that follows me shall not walk in the darkness, but shall have the light of life. The great kingdom covenant from Adam to Jesus. If you enjoy the work that I do here and would like to support me, I would greatly appreciate it. I'm definitely thankful, especially during these times, so thank you very much. And I would just like to reiterate, God, through Adam, through Moses, eventually being summed up in Jesus. The Bible is a book that is about the relationship between God and Adam all the way from the beginning to the end. Wherever you are, I hope this finds you well. God bless.